Hello, and welcome to the 3K subscriber Q&A. Also, excuse me, commemorating the second anniversary, the unfortunate anniversary of October 7th. And while we're waiting for people to come into the stream, and before we start our discussion today, I just want to take a moment to think about everyone who has died since October the 7th, every unarmed civilian, every child, every mother, every father, every brother, every sister, all the combatants. This is a conflict of our own making. It's a conflict that we have allowed to continue because we will not stand up to the Israeli terrorists. And it is unimaginable to think about all of those stories, all of those lives, all of those people who had no idea prior to October 7th, 2023, what was going to happen. And so I just want to take a moment to pause, to honor them, to think about the lives that they could have led had we been more willing to stand up for them. Okay, so today there are three things I want to talk about as we're thinking about all the things that are happening regarding Palestine at the moment. There's actually a lot of noise, a lot of press releases, but is there really a lot going on? And while it appears to be new things, what we're really seeing is a repeat of things that we've been seeing for 15, 20, 30, 40 years. So even though you, like me, may be new to being engaged on Palestine, what is happening now is not new. And you really have to be aware of that. If you have questions on anything I'm talking about, please feel free to put those in the chat. I will do my best to try to keep up with those. The first thing I want to talk about is the two-state solution. Now, what has been said out loud for the first time, and in a sense I applaud this, is Netanyahu has said that there will be no two-state solution. Now, we have known about this for years. We have known there is no such thing as a two-state solution because if the other state, i.e. Israel, in the so-called two-state solution does not agree that there will be a two-state solution, there's not going to be a two-state solution. But what's different now is that Netanyahu has said there will be no two-state solution, which ties into the so-called recognition of Palestine at the UN. So if you're going to recognize a state, you're simply saying that that country has a right to sovereignty. What's interesting in the case of Palestine, this is recognition of a state without defined borders that is at best currently occupied by a hostile power. A hostile power, which by the way is a so-called member in good standing of the UN. So if these countries are saying, we recognize the state of Palestine and we want to work diligently towards a two-state solution, and Israel's prime minister gets on to the applause of Israelis everywhere and says there will be no two-state solution, then what is the point? What this is on the part of any of these countries, and I'm trying to keep track of who has gone through this performative declaration for Palestine. Be it the UK, be it Canada. This is a performance to hopefully put off pressure building from the electorate. The electorate is saying what is going on is wrong. We want something from you. And so this performance, we recognize the state of Palestine. But rather, it's like someone's house, your neighbor, having a house that's burning, and you saying, I recognize that my neighbor has a house. The house is burning. You're doing nothing about it, but you're going on camera to let people know that you recognize that that person has a house. Thing is, the house is burning in front of you. People are dying, but that's not important to you. What's important for you is that you perform for the cameras. So while I understand that some people are very heartened by this, what they have to realize is the European countries are very late to the game here. Most of the world has recognized Palestine as a state. The so-called international community, remember, when you say the so-called international, when the West refers to the international community, they're talking about themselves. They're talking about Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the EU, and the US. That is the international community, a micro minority of the world population. So when these people finally wake up and say, oh, yes, we think there might be a Palestinian state, they're not leading, they're following. They're following all the other countries in the world who long ago recognized that there is a Palestinian people and there is such a thing as a Palestinian state, though we do not know yet how we're going to bring it into existence against the iron will of Israel. So I know people want to take some kind of solace that we're making some kind of progress, that there's something positive going on. And I'm not here to stand and say, this is terrible, this is negative, this is no good. Okay, let's grant that it is a step, even if it's a performative step, even if it's something that's just a bone thrown to a population, which is only starting to wake up a little bit to the murder of children, the murder of unarmed men and women, the occupation and imprisonment of millions of people inside the world's largest concentration camp. So I think that we can take a tiny bit of solace and say, all right, I'm glad that you finally woke up to what everyone else has woken up to decades ago. But what does it mean for you to recognize Palestine, but you still send weapons to people to bomb Palestine? What does it mean that you recognize Palestine when you do not do anything to stop a flotilla being interdicted in international waters illegally? This is an act of piracy. If this were anyone else other than the special chosen state that is never allowed to be criticized, it would be a real problem. So the two-state solution was dead on arrival when it was talked about years ago. Even we could say it was dead on arrival in 1947 when the UN attempted partition. Two-state solution has never been viable. In a sense, because neither side really ever wanted that. Hamas has been willing to accept it if it was the only thing on offer. And there's been a great movement within Palestinian community to say, all right, let's do that. Let's start with this and see what develops. But the Israelis are never going to be okay with this. For them, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, these are minimum things for them. They want the Sinai. They want Lebanon. They've already occupied more parts of Syria. There are still plenty of people who go to any of the documentaries I've covered on the settlers. They talk about the East Bank of the Jordan. So the two-state solution is dead, has always been dead. And no matter how many world leaders get up and say, we recognize Palestine and we want to work towards the two-state solution, it doesn't matter. Israel isn't interested in the two-state solution, therefore there will be no two-state solution. However, let us take a tiny, tiny moment and celebrate the idea of any kind of positive movement for Palestine. Nabila, why am I wearing an Emirates t-shirt? Interesting thing. This is actually, for me, these are Palestinian colors. So in the tradition of Palestinian flags being banned in Israel and the move to a watermelon, because a watermelon has all the colors of the Palestinian flag, but it can't be banned. For me, this isn't even a Palestinian jersey. This is an Arsenal jersey, and Arsenal will tell you this is an African jersey because these happen to also be African national colors, you could say, of the Pan-African flags. But I've claimed it for Palestine because it happens to have the right colors for Palestine. So I'm not doing this in favor of Emirates. We could say in some part for Arsenal, but for me, it's about the Palestinian colors and having access to Palestinian colors when I travel. I have a couple of Palestinian soccer jerseys that I wear. I just don't have them with me at the moment. So I hope you understand that. And I'm not trying to be supportive of the Emirati government by wearing this. So my apologies if I'm giving that impression. That's not what I'm trying to do. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about, and thanks for your question, Nabila. The next thing I want to talk about is the Gaza peace plan. Now, given that this is something coming from President Trump, we know that he doesn't know anything about it. Someone wrote this for him, and then he just reads it, if he even read it. But what I want to do is use it as an opportunity to talk about the standard Zionist propaganda that is given to us through this document. So it's presented as a fait accompli. The Palestinians will sign it or they will not. And if not, there'll be more death and destruction. So I want to read each statement and then comment on it. And as I said before, if you have any questions, please feel free to just drop them in and I'll try to catch up with them as quickly as I can. So the first point is Gaza will be a de-radicalized terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. It's hard to read that whole sentence without laughing. The whole sentence is a joke. It is a terror-free zone. Gaza is a open-air prison which has been blockaded since 2006 by the Israelis. It is an open-air concentration camp imposed by the Israelis and supported by the European Union, the United States, and the rest of the so-called international community, including all the Arabic countries, all of the Muslim countries, have all supported this. Nobody has acted against Israel in favor of the Palestinians in a positive way, in a real way. Yes, you can send some money. Yes, you can send some aid, but realistically, standing up against Israel. And then the phrase does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Can anybody name a country in the world that has bombed the capital of every one of its neighbors? I'll wait for a moment. I'm sure you can guess who it is. It's Israel. Israel has bombed every single one of its neighbors' capitals. Who is the threat to the neighbors? Is it the Palestinians? Who is it that constantly invades their neighbors? Is it the Palestinians? So when you say Gaza will be a de-radicalized terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors, we can do that quite easily. We just need to get the Israelis out. We need to remove Israeli control of the borders. We need to reinstall the airport and the ports in Gaza, and it will be a terror-free zone. It does not pose a threat to its neighbors. As long as Israel's out of it, it can't pose a threat to its neighbors. But as long as Israel is in there, people will be radicalized and people will resist an occupation. Resisting an occupation is not only legal by international law, but it is moral by almost every code of conduct in the natural law around the world. You have a legal and moral right to resist your occupiers, even by violence. So saying Gaza will be a de-radicalized terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors, sure, the Israelis can leave and it can be that. Number two, Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza who have suffered more than enough. And so that last line, who have suffered more than enough. Why have the people in Gaza suffered? Is it because of the people in Gaza, or has it been because of the people acting upon the people in Gaza? Has it been the Israelis? A slight comment here. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it is important to always note, redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza, part of the reason Hamas was elected was the frustration with the corruption of the Palestinian Authority. I remember being in Bethlehem, speaking to a young Palestinian in 2023, father of 2 or 3. And he said, Stephen, did you know we have a Palestinian Navy? And of course, I knew this was going somewhere. And I said, okay, so tell me more. And he said, there are 400 people in the Palestinian Navy. We don't have a ship. But what he was saying was these were people on the Palestinian Authority's payroll who were claiming to be part of the Navy. And he was pointing towards corruption. Now, of course, in each of those cases, that's money that goes to a family. And in Gaza and in Palestine, money to one person really goes to 20 people in many cases because you're supporting your family. And the notion of family, particularly in Arabic culture, but particularly in Palestine, there's a much greater sense of family. So a first cousin in Arabic culture is almost like a brother to Westerners. So I'm not saying that those corrupt people didn't also take care of their families, but there are plenty of corrupt people in the PA. That's why Hamas was elected, because Hamas, even though they were not really posing as people to govern, they had shown themselves to be free of corruption. They had shown themselves to be a charity acting in the interest of Palestinians. That's why they were elected. But the Gazans were not allowed to democratically elect the people who would rule them because they were punished for voting for Hamas. So Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza. Certainly, we hope not by real estate cronies from the United States and their Jewish son-in-laws. That is certainly not what we want to happen. 3, if both sides agree to this proposal, the war will immediately end. Who is the side that murders the interlocutor? So when we're talking about negotiations, an interlocutor is the person who's sitting on the other side of the table with you. So you're negotiating for peace. Who is the side that keeps murdering the negotiators? I'll wait for a moment. You got it right. It's the Israelis. So if both sides agree to this proposal, we know that Israel says one thing and then they say one thing with the left hand and they bomb with the right. And keep in mind, this is something that they brag about by way of deception. This is how Mossad operates. So if both sides agree to this proposal, the war will immediately end. We have to look at that word, war. Is this a war? A war is something that happens between combating armies, people who are armed, or even you could say people who are controlling drones and attacking each other's drones. This is not a war. This is a massacre. This is a slaughter. This is killing unarmed men, women, and children. Civilians are non-combatants. You, by definition, cannot engage in a war with non-combatants. It's a massacre. It's a slaughter. So again, this is Zionist phrasing. The war will immediately end as if there's been a war going on. This has been a murderous genocide that's happened for the last 2 years, which is only a carryover from a murderous slow motion genocide that's been happening for 100 years. But the war will immediately end? Probably not, at least until the Israelis decide that they're going to do some more murdering. Israeli forces will withdraw to the agreed upon line to prepare for a hostage release. Maybe. During this time, all military operations, including aerial and artillery bombardment, will be suspended, and battle lines will remain frozen until conditions are met for the complete stage withdrawal. As Norm Finkelstein has noted for us in the past, what this will mean is let's say a ceasefire is listed for 12 o'clock. What we will know for sure is between 9 o'clock and noon or whatever time, 6 a.m. and noon, they will dump every bomb they have. They will shoot everything they have because they say, well, it's not a ceasefire yet. So when we see this sort of talk, just be prepared for even more violence leading up to the deadline. This is how the Israelis conduct themselves. Within 72 hours of Israel publicly accepting this agreement, all hostages, alive and deceased, will be returned. So we haven't talked about this too much on the channel. It is unjust to take civilian hostages. I am not approving of Hamas's action to do this. I've said before there are other ways that you can conduct this. There are sabotage operations. That said, I understand the context in which Hamas did this. They didn't feel that they could have done anything else. The Abraham Accords were being pushed, and Saudi Arabia was about to move forward with something, and so they thought we've got to act. So I understand the context of it, and from everything that we've seen, all the Israeli interviews of hostages, these men and women have been well treated. So apart from some errant, wrong, morally wrong incidents that happened on October 7th in which civilians were shot by Hamas combatants, that's wrong. The civilians that have been taken hostage by Hamas have been treated well and have been paraded by Hamas on the days of release. And these people have gone on Israeli television and said they were treated well. None of them have said, I was beaten, I was tortured, I was forced to kiss the Quran. None of that. None of that happened. And so Hamas has shown themselves to be humane captors. But what is not mentioned here, when they keep talking about hostages, wear the yellow ribbon, talk about them. And we're talking about, I remember, I don't want to talk about, well, we have 5 and you have 10 or whatever it is. There are 9,000 people being held in Israeli jails without charges. Who are these if they're not hostages? These are Palestinians being held indefinitely, some of them children, some of them 8, 9, 10-year-old children. Commit. And I'm happy for it. I'm here for it. For every Israeli hostage whose remains are released, Israel will release the remains of 15 deceased Gazans. These numbers, even though they're significant in their ratio, they tell a story. If this were some kind of war, there would be some kind of symmetry in the numbers. Let's say 1 for 3, or 1 for 5, or 1 for 7. But instead, what we have are, I think there's maybe 50 hostages left. Israel will release 250 life sentence prisoners and 1,700 Gazans. Think about those numbers. That's 2,000 Palestinians for 50 Israeli hostages. So when we talk about proportionality and we talk about, well, it's both sides and both sides need to do this, one side has all the power and one side is the victim. But the side that has all the power, they've convinced everybody that they're the victims because they have, through numerous contexts and situations, portrayed themselves as a victim all throughout history. And this is nothing new for them. But yet here in point 5, the numbers tell the story. For every Israeli hostage whose remains are released, Israel will release the remains of 15 dead Gazans. Imagine not releasing the remains of dead people to their families. That is just something basic you do in war. And those numbers tell a story, just like we saw with Ukraine and Russia with the exchange of deceased. We've been told by the Western media that there are millions of Russians that have died. And yet when Russia brings 6,000 Ukrainian bodies, remains, to be given back to their families, the Ukrainians have 100, 200, 300 Russian bodies. So how is it that Russia's lost 1 million people, but when they bring 6,000 bodies to exchange, the Ukrainians have 300 Russians? So here we see these numbers. Every Israeli hostage whose remains are released, and we're talking about a couple hundred hostages, Israel will release the remains of 15 deceased Gazans. And we know that the numbers are wrong. We know we're talking about hundreds of thousands of Gazans that have been killed. All the estimates, all the numbers we've been given, they're low. People have been talking about 40,000, 50,000, 60,000. Those numbers are low. They're not realistic. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that have been murdered. And if you're looking at this ratio, one hostage for 15, the remains of one Israeli hostage for 15 deceased Gazans, this tells a story. And remember, these are Israeli numbers. This is an Israeli document. This is a document approved by Netanyahu. Those numbers tell a story. And they tell a story that we've been lied to by our governments. Huge surprise. Point 6. Once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. Let's look at that second sentence first. Do we think that in its most successful resistance operation in the history of Palestine, possibly, going back to the 1936 to 1939 revolt, which was previously, you could say, the most successful resistance operation, brutally crushed by the British. And as often has been said, Hassan Kanafani and others have said as much, this was the wrong fight against the wrong enemy. It was the early fight against the wrong enemy. And it really weakened the elite of the Palestinians prior to 1948. So do we really think that members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza, so after fighting for their land, standing in the spirit of Sumud for the land in Palestine, they're going to leave for another country at the end of this? This is what they've been fighting for 2 years for. This is what they've lost their family members for, their wife, their children. They're going to do this. So that second sentence is a joke. It shows that they don't understand their enemy. Once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to a peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. You cannot decommission your weapons as long as you have an occupier. As long as you have an occupier, you have a right to resist an occupier with arms. So it's unjust for Hamas to give up their weapons. They could choose to. It's Hamas's decision if they want to do that. But it doesn't make any sense, especially after what we've seen for the last 2 years. And then committing to peaceful coexistence, how many times has Hamas offered something and then been murdered? How many times have we had peaceful negotiators trying to work for something and then been murdered? We don't have any Israeli negotiators who've been murdered by Hamas. All the murdering has been done, as always, by the Israelis. Point 7, upon acceptance of this agreement, full aid will be immediately sent into the Gaza Strip. Why is it not? It is immoral to deprive men, women, and children of basic things like water, flour, bread, diapers, baby formula. This is what is being deprived. Are they going to make weapons from diapers? Are they going to build rockets from flour? This idea that full aid, you have to do this before we're going to give you bread and water. This is crazy. This is that sentence right there. This is where we are in 2025 with the Palestinians. If you do this, we're going to give you bread and water. I don't have anything to say. There's nothing to say about that sentence. At a minimum, aid quantities will be consistent with what was included in the 19 January 2025 agreement regarding humanitarian aid, including rehabilitation of infrastructure, water, electricity, and sewage. Let's note there, the bombing of water, electricity, and sewage is a war crime. But they're listing that it's happened. So those war crimes that we committed, that'll be fixed. Rehabilitation of hospitals and bakeries. You bombed hospitals and bakeries. Remember, you told them they were all Hamas. Remember, Hamas is everywhere, right? Hamas is in the sewers. Hamas is in the hospitals. Hamas is in the bakeries. Hamas is at the yoga studio. Whatever it is, you're going to bomb it. Entry of necessary equipment to remove rubble and open roads. Norm Finkelstein has noted, and there are numerous human rights reports that talk about this, it's going to take something like 60 years, 70 years to remove the rubble that is in Gaza now. It boggles the mind to think about, especially when you think about the size of Gaza. It's not a large strip of land. 70 years to remove that rubble. Just think about how much rubble that is. It's not 3 generations to remove the rubble. And this is just talked about entry of necessary equipment to remove rubble and open roads. This has all been done by one party. Point 8, entry of distribution and aid in the Gaza Strip will proceed without interference from the two parties through the United Nations and its agencies and the Red Crescent, in addition to other international institutions not associated in any manner with either party. Opening the Rafah crossing in both directions will be subject to the same mechanism implemented under the 19 January 2025 agreement. So I can pause here for a moment. 19 January 2025, this is the ceasefire that was violated by the Israelis. And if we look back at every ceasefire, and let's look through this 2000 to 2014, that gets us through Operation Protective Edge. Who is always violating the ceasefires? Who is ending the ceasefires? It's almost always, and there's 2 occasions I can think of in particular where there was a provocation and the Palestinians broke the ceasefire. But I'm going to argue 85 to 90% of the time the ceasefire was broken by the Israelis, and deceptively so. There's no announcement of it, they just broke it. This 19 January 2025 agreement, something that was done before Trump's presidential inauguration, why is the ceasefire still not in place? Why is the aid, water, electricity, sewage agreement regarding humanitarian aid, they're referencing the 7.78, why is this not honored? I'll pause for a moment because I saw a question in the chat. How far back does the ideology of Zionism go? Was Theodore Herzl the founder? So Theodore Herzl, and it's interesting you ask about this because I just posted on Palestine Bookshelf today a 2024 review. So both the 2025 and 2024 review back before Palestine Bookshelf was its own project. So there's 2 reviews on the channel if you want to go back and look at them. He wrote a small pamphlet called The Jewish State. And so it wasn't called Israel. It was just this idea of a project to give land to the Jewish people. And the first Zionist Congress, and I'm happy to be corrected in the chat here. I'm sure I could just look it up if I had a moment. 1904, 1905, 1906. I want to say it's one of those years. That was first brought up. Well, where will this land be? And there was discussion of Argentina. There was discussion of land in Africa, and then, of course, the land in Palestine. And Jewish rabbis who'd gone down there had come back and reported to the First Zionist Congress, the bride is beautiful, but she is already married. And of course, they're talking about Palestine. There were already people there. Remember, it's an empty land. But the rabbis reporting to the First Zionist Congress knew differently, and they said differently. So when we talk about the ideology of Zionism, let's say it was an idea in the water among Jews, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. It was building momentum. Herzl writes the Jewish state as a charter, you could say, and he's considered one of the fathers of Zionism. Not because you also have the revisionist wing of Zionism, someone like Ze'ev Jabotinsky, who was a hardcore militant terrorist. That's part of Zionism too. This was the intellectual wing of Zionism. And in the reviews, you'll hear, Herzl talk about peaceful coexistence. Anyone who will want to come and live with us, they are welcome to live in peace with us if they obey our laws. And I was reading this and I was laughing and I thought, what would Theodore Herzl think of Israel? This man who argued for the Jewish state. What has the Jewish state become? While Herzl was dishonest in his means and he talked about spiriting the population away, I genuinely believe, based on his writings, that Herzl was not someone who was interested in genocide of the Palestinians. There's nothing in his writings to say that. He wanted to find every means to remove them legally, talking about spiriting the penniless populations across the border and then leaving them. Say, "Oh, look, you're in Jordan now. I don't know how you got there. I guess you'll have to figure it out." And then close the border behind them. So he wanted to use deception and tricky means, but he didn't want to mow people down and murder them. So no one can say, again, based on the writings of Herzl, there's nothing to indicate that he was a Ze'ev Jabotinsky, someone who was interested in the violent murder and genocide. And some people would say, Stephen, is that really any different? If you're advocating for the displacement of the Palestinians, does it matter whether it's violent or not? And I hear that point. But I think it's important to try to parse that when someone's asking the question. The ideology of Zionism, people often talk about let's say, the diplomatic wing of Zionism, the one that was arguing, negotiating for land, versus the militant wing that says, well, we're going to go take this land regardless. That's always been a tension. But what's happened in Israel is a march to the right this entire time. So that if you talk about peace, you're considered a leftist in Israel. So it's a left-wing principle to talk about peace. And so we now have an Israeli populace, the ones who are still living in Israel now, who are really okay with what's going on. So people will tell you, oh, there's lots of people who are not okay with this. There's really plenty of people who are fine with this. If you look at the polling, if there really were discontent, we'd see protests in the streets, but we don't see that in Israel. And Gideon Levy talks about this. He referenced that in 1982, after Shatila and the Sabra and Shatila massacres, he said there were 400,000 people out in the streets in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and other places protesting on behalf of the Palestinians who were murdered. Think about that. 1982, it wasn't that long ago. And he said, I don't know that you could get 400 people out in the streets now. I'm not trying to denigrate Jewish Voice for Peace, any of those other amazing organizations who are out there mobilizing and marching against this government. I don't want to denigrate them. But what I mean is their numbers are not significant when compared to the counterparty, which is most of Israel. And we have a further movement that we've never seen before, which is the far right being in positions of power. Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, saying these things out loud. I reposted something earlier this week from Ben-Gvir. He said, the chosen people are not subject to international law. All the rest of you are, but not us. Could you imagine someone saying that in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s? That would have had a strong reaction. Now it's just Tuesday. This is a minister of the Israeli government saying, the chosen people do not have to obey international law. Well, clearly not. You don't believe in international law. You don't believe in any of this. You don't believe in moral law. You don't believe in the natural law. You don't believe in 10 commandments, but you are the people who apparently, are the most important and most moral army in the world. Point 9. So B writes, I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, please feel free to put that in there, but I hope that gives a broad answer to your question. Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza. So you are going to tell people how they will be allowed to rule themselves in their own country. A temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee. Let's just look at those three words together. Apolitical Palestinian committee. It is not as if the Palestinians have wanted to be political. They have been politicized. They have been radicalized by the illegal Israeli occupiers. Palestinians want to do other things. They would like to think about going to university, or going to become a doctor, or going to become a tradesman, or building a business, or going out to potentially work in other countries and then come back. They would like to have those things, but instead, all they have is the occupation. So all they can do is react to the occupation. They cannot pursue their dreams. They cannot pursue even getting water or bread. And so the idea that there's going to be an apolitical Palestinian, who are these apolitical Palestinians? Where are they? Do you think that you're going to bomb people for 2 years, murder everybody, and you're going to find a Palestinian who says, "Oh, I don't have any opinion on the occupation. I'm going to help you with this committee"? There's no such thing as an apolitical Palestinian. And in fact, one of the funny things, if you're talking about this, if you're with Lebanese or you're with Palestinians or you're with Jordanians, at some point in the conversation, we'll always laugh because I'm always asking questions when I'm with these people because I know the least and they know the most, and I'm always trying to extract information from them. And they will say something like, it's always about politics. It always comes back to politics. And so that's a funny refrain when you're talking with Arabs about the Palestinian issue. You're talking to Palestinians about it. They'll laugh because they say, this is our whole lives. We don't have a choice. So the idea that there's an apolitical Palestinian committee, there are no apolitical Palestinians. This just shows that the people writing this document are just accepting Zionist talking points. They're not thinking. They're not thinking about what's actually going on here. The committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians who will decide who is qualified, and international experts because they've done such wonderful things for us, with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body, the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by Donald J. Trump. I want you to think about this. Is there a world leader who knows less about Palestine than Donald J. Trump? Is there a world leader who knows less about his own country's history than Donald J. Trump? With other members and heads of state to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair, who, with George Bush, is a war criminal, was responsible for the death of 1 million Iraqi civilians, who told us there were weapons of mass destruction and then didn't say anything when there were no, because that was a lie that was co-chaired with him and the Americans. And most of us bought it. I'm sure I was one of those people who bought it as well at that time, and to my shame. This body will set the framework and handle the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza until such time as the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program, as outlined in various proposals, including President Trump's peace plan in 2020. You had a peace plan in 2020. Where'd that go? So we've got this new one in 2025, and the Saudi-French proposal, and can securely and effectively take back control of Gaza. This body will call on best international standards to create modern and efficient governance that serves the people of Gaza and is conducive to attracting investment. Who is going to give these people advice? Every country in the West is completely dysfunctional at the moment. Almost every. I should qualify that. The United States in meltdown. France in meltdown, just lost another prime minister, record shortest prime minister ever. Germany, economic meltdown, having Volkswagen having its first layoffs in its history. All the Great Britain looking at taking an IMF loan. These are the international experts that are going to teach the Palestinians how to govern themselves. I mean, this whole paragraph is a giant joke. Like, they're just trolling people who just accept whatever they're told. Yes, you experts, you people who run your country so well. The French president is a joke. He's consistently being voted against. His prime ministers are consistently being rejected, but he refuses to step down because he's not really interested in governing France. He's interested in giving a lot of speeches and going to Davos. The same thing with all these other clowns. I mean, the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by President Donald J. Trump. Who knows less about Gaza than President Trump? Is there anyone? If we went out on the street and we found a dog and we asked that dog, can you tell us where Gaza is? That dog would know more than the president. And yet he is going to be the head of the Board of Peace. All right, point number 10. A Trump economic development plan to rebuild and energize Gaza will be created by convening a panel of experts who have helped birth some of the thriving modern miracle cities in the Middle East. Many thoughtful investment proposals and exciting development ideas have been crafted by well-meaning international groups and will be considered to synthesize the security and governance frameworks to attract and facilitate these investments that will create jobs, opportunity, and hope for a future Gaza. A Trump economic development plan. If you have any familiarity with the presidents, I've read both of the books that are under his name, but were ghost written, but he's taken credit for writing those books. I've read two of the Bob Woodward books on the Trump presidency. A lot of this is just PR. President Trump is not really a successful businessman. He just has the reputation of being a successful businessman. But if you study what happened with the casinos in Atlantic City and various other things, he likes to take credit for the good and he likes to erase the bad. But why would why would we have a Trump economic development plan? And then they talk about these thriving modern miracle cities in the Middle East. There's no miracle. They have a bunch of oil. They sold it to people and then they built stuff. How is that a miracle? Of course it's modern. They're not going to install non-modern stuff. So you're trying to give Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Jeddah some kind of credit. They just sold and then they built stuff. So, and will they still be there? There's the famous Arab proverb in relation to this time period. The father walked, the son rode on a camel, and the grandson will walk again. That once all this money is spent and the economies have not really been developed and the people have not been nurtured and developed, you'll go back to what was. This is a moment in time. And the these exciting development ideas, you mean like your son-in-law's plan to build beachfront properties in Gaza and probably develop the Gaza oil field that belongs to the Palestinian people? Are you talking about those well-meaning international groups? This is all theft. And keep in mind, I don't believe in any of the Arab states. I don't believe in any of the Muslim countries. There are a few, Malaysia, Indonesia, who've done wonderful things, and I want to give credit to them. But they're not even in the region. The people, the players in the region, they've done, you could say, performative actions. But if they really wanted to stop this, they could. They have more leverage now with Israel than they'd ever had before. They were weaker in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. And when they lost in 67 and they had that kind of win in 73. All this is, point 10, is a listing of the theft that is going to happen to the Palestinian people. Why are the Palestinian people not being asked about any of these things? These are just points that are imposed on them. We're going to do this to you. At no point here, and we're at point 10 of a 20-point program, at no point are we talking about consulting the Palestinians, other than to say there will be some apolitical Palestinians, whoever those people are, who will then be permitted to do these things. 11, a special economic zone will be established with preferred tariff and access rates to be negotiated with participating countries. Once again, this will be imposed upon the Palestinians. The Palestinians will not be allowed to govern themselves. They will be told what they are allowed to do. Point 12. This is perhaps one of the most darkly humorous points in the entire document. Point 12. No one will be forced to leave Gaza, and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. We will encourage people to stay and offer them the opportunity to build a better Gaza. So here we have to think about our famous one-eyed Israeli general, considered one of the heroes of Israel, Moshe Dayan, who in 67, when the occupation happens, repeats a sentiment that he talked about in 48, which is, you will live like dogs, we will see who stays, and we will see what happens. The idea of a non-rights-based occupation. We're going to occupy you, we're going to make life difficult for you, and we'll see what happens. And what they didn't expect was the Palestinian principle of sumud to rise up. They thought they would crush the Palestinians would leave. And instead what happened was Palestinians, when they could, they'd go to Gulf countries, they'd get jobs, they'd send money home to their families so their families could stay and resist. So they would go out there, they would leave their homeland to make sure that the Palestinians could stay in their homeland. So this idea, all the Israelis have wanted to do is push down on the Palestinians everywhere and force them to psychologically break and leave. And many who have left will tell you that they have regretted doing that. And I've said before, I've said in many programs, I respect the choice of any Palestinian to choose to leave Palestine. I cannot imagine what it would be like to live in this situation. So I want to be respectful of Palestinians' agency as I am respectful of anyone else's. If a New Zealander wants to leave New Zealand, if a Englishman wants to leave England, I would rather you not. I want you to stay and build your country, but you have the right to do that. In this particular case, this is all lies. No one will be forced to leave Gaza. That's all that the Israelis want to do. They want them all out. They just know that they couldn't send them on buses like they did in 48 and in some cases in 67. But if they could tomorrow, they would sweep them all out and move in. And we have people like Daniela Weiss who are leading boat tours down there and they have maps of all the new settlements that they're going to have in Gaza. So this is not no one will be forced to leave Gaza. Those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. We know that hasn't even been true prior to this cycle of violence. In the 2000 to 2014 period, people who leave and are gone for too long, they lose status and they can't re-enter. We've seen that happen over and over and over. So the idea that Palestinians are going to have freedom of movement, this is crazy. Palestinians, if they would just want to go to Egypt, which is a neighboring country, sometimes they can't go through Rafah. They have to go out Allenby Bridge, out through Jordan, and come back this way. It's very expensive, very time consuming just to cross a border. If this is true, point 12, it's something that has never happened in Gaza's history. Point 13, Hamas and other factions agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza, directly, indirectly, or in any form. All military, terror, and offensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapon production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt. There will be a process of demilitarization of Gaza under the supervision of independent monitors, which will include placing weapons permanently beyond use through an agreed process of decommissioning and supported by an internationally funded buyback and reintegration program, all verified by the independent monitors. New Gaza will be fully committed to building a prosperous economy and to peaceful coexistence with their neighbors. This goes back to point 1. Who is it that is the peaceful coexister? It's it's not the Israelis. The Israelis have bombed the capitals of every single neighboring country. They're the ones who need to be demilitarized. They're the ones who need to have their weapons removed. They're the ones who need to declare their nuclear weapons, sign on or what, or have them removed. The nuclear weapons program they built illegally, and they stole weapons, and they sold material and secrets from the United States through their well-funded and brilliant, you could say, spying program. I mean, are there any better spies than the Israelis? Really, I don't know. So the point I want to make on point 13 is this idea that Hamas is the only entity of resistance among the Palestinian people. This could only be thought by people who are not involved in studying this. There's the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine. There's the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. There are a lot of there's 12 or 13 factions. They met in China. I think it was late last year. There are 12, 13 different factions. When the election that Hamas won in, there were many other people on the ballot running. Palestinians have a very developed political sense. That's why I was laughing about apolitical Palestinians. Who are these people? They're very political. They have opinions about everything. Arabs will tell you this anyway, but particularly Palestinians, they have a very well-developed sense of how they want things to go for their country. So this idea is that Hamas is the boogeyman, and once we remove the boogeyman, everything will be fine. But this is patently false. If you remove Hamas today, you have Islamic Jihad, you have any number of other people who you could say are more violent. In some ways, Hamas, and this is what people don't realize, Hamas is quite moderate compared to some Palestinian parties. So the idea that, if we get Hamas to step down, then everything's going to be fine. You really think that after all these years, after being terrorized since 1917, the Palestinians today, after enduring the most horrendous attack upon their people in their entire history, they're just going to lay down now and they're going to be part of a weapons buyback program? This whole paragraph is so unrealistic, and it again ties into the Zionist talking points. Hamas is the bad guy, and once we remove Hamas, everything's going to be okay. If you remove Hamas, if Hamas disappears from planet Earth tomorrow and the word is deleted out of the dictionary, there will be something else. And it could be, for these people anyway, so-called worse than Hamas. So this is a false boogeyman and something unrealistic. The Palestinians, God willing, will not lay down their arms. I want them to continue to resist an illegal occupier. I'll do everything I can to help support them in their resistance. But I hope that they do not lay down their arms, because if they do, they'll be massacred. Point 14, a guarantee will be provided by regional partners to ensure that Hamas and the factions comply with their obligations, and that New Gaza, capital N, capital G, poses no threat to its neighbors or its people. How does Gaza pose a threat to its neighbors? The threat that is posed is by Israel to Gaza. It runs an open air concentration camp with 2 million people in it. I should say, formerly 2 million people. Probably, I'm part of the school thinking there's probably 460, 450,000 Palestinians that have been murdered in the last 2 years. I believe that. So if we're talking about 1.5 million people, they are the threat to their neighbors, or is Israel the threat? Just think through that. Look at the evidence. Look at what we've seen for the last 2 years. Point 15, the United States will work with Arab and international partners to develop a temporary international stabilization force to immediately deploy in Gaza. The ISF will train and provide support to vetted Palestinian police forces in Gaza and will consult with Jordan and Egypt, who have extensive experience in this field. This force will be the long-term internal security solution. The ISF will work with Israel and Egypt to help secure border areas, along with newly trained Palestinian police forces. It is critical to prevent munitions from entering Gaza and to facilitate the rapid and secure flow of goods to rebuild and revitalize Gaza. A deconfliction mechanism will be agreed upon by the parties. So we're going to have Jordanian and Egyptian soldiers permanently patrolling Gaza. This once again points out that we're not interested in asking what are the root causes of the conflict. This is simply treating a symptom. The Gazans are violent, they have to have their guns taken, and we're going to permanently patrol. What is the problem? Are Palestinians inherently violent, or are they simply resisting an occupier with violence, justly and morally? Why would the Jordanians and the Egyptians be interested in being long-term security forces in Gaza? Why would the Gazans be interested in having the Jordanians and the Egyptians police them? The Palestinians want to govern themselves just like anyone else. Imagine sending Palestinians to go police the streets of Cairo. That doesn't make any sense. This whole thing, once again, is a fantasy. Point 15. Point 16, this is the one that I'm not certain that this wording was agreed to by Netanyahu. I think this might have been changed. This is something I'm reading from a text that is on the BBC website from 4 days ago. That's what the text says. But I cannot believe that Netanyahu would have signed off on this sentence. I'm going to read this to you. Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. That is an unacceptable sentence to Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, Daniela Weiss, all of these horrible people. In fact, the opposite is true. Israel will occupy, will annex Gaza. They're upset that Israel removed the settlements, the illegal, immoral settlements. Even though it's an open-air concentration camp, they want all of that occupied. So Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. I don't see how the Israelis would sign off on this. As the ISF establishes control and stability, the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, immoral murderers, war criminals, will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF, ISF, the guarantors, and the United States. Notice the Palestinians are not included in any of that. The IDF, ISF, guarantors, and the United States. No consultancy with the Palestinians. With the objective of a secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to Israel, Egypt, or its citizens. How has Gaza been a threat to Israel or Egypt or its citizens? I haven't posted about this yet. I'm going to share a story at some point in the future. I have visited the home of a settler family in Stroh, in which a Palestinian Qassam rocket hit the home. The family received a warning. If you may not know this, Israelis have an app that's detecting and monitoring what these are. These they call them rockets, and your mind thinks, okay, what's a rocket look like? And you think this big thing. I've held it in my hand before. I've talked to people about it. It was maybe twice the size of this, and I could hold both pieces of the rock in my hand. I've held a Qassam rocket in my hand in the home of an Israeli settler who was warned ahead of time. They went to a safe room. It blew part of a window out. And I'm not saying that's right or that's good. I'm simply saying when they say rocket attacks and who's safe and not safe, the people who are not safe are the Palestinians. If you look at who's been killed in these so-called rocket attacks over 20 years, it doesn't, I think, even add up to 20 Israelis. But when you look at the murder that's happened, especially in the last 2 years, but prior to that, let's say in the 2000 to 2014 time period, well documented by Norm Finkelstein and other really people who have incredible patience and incredible devotion, it has been 10 times that number. 10 times that number, if not more. All the statistics are there for you to look at. It's been published by Human Rights Watch and other organizations. B'Tselem, an Israeli organization, has talked about this. Uh, Practically, the IDF will progressively hand over the Gaza territory it occupies to the ISF according to an agreement they will make with the transitional authority until they are withdrawn completely from Gaza, save for a security perimeter presence that will remain until Gaza is properly secure from any resurgent terror threat. And every accusation is a confession. Who are the terrorists? It is the Jews. It is the Israelis who are terrorizing the Palestinians. To call the Palestinians terrorists in relation to what the Israelis are doing is a joke. Need to pause here. I think there is a question from Leela. What is stopping the UN General Assembly authorizing a multinational protection force for Gaza? This is a mechanism that can occur and has before. It's the question the whole world is asking. Why has this not happened? This mechanism can override the US veto. Well, I don't think there's the votes for that. But in any case, it's not as if the UN is a friend of Palestine, Leela. Uh, in fact, one could say this entire problem is at the foot of the United Nations, who took it upon themselves when they had no moral or legal right to do so, to act to partition Palestine. The UN had no authority, no moral or legal authority to partition Palestine. They acted on the behalf of a minority of the population, the Jewish population in Palestine, and gave them 55% of the land. They gave the minority 55% of the land, and they carved up the Palestinian side into these unmanageable borders. So I don't have any confidence in the UN to do anything positive for the Palestinians because from the beginning, they're the ones who wronged the Palestinians to this day. And not only does the UN not possess the votes, I don't think, but they don't possess the moral. Even if they wanted to turn around and say, we want to right our immoral and illegal partition of Palestine, how could they do that now? They would have to act against the United States. The United States is the most powerful country in the world, for better or for worse. It's not something that, as a U.S. citizen, I'm happy about, but it's the reality of things. And as long as the United States supports Israel in this, the UN is irrelevant, really. So I know that's not the answer that you would hope for. I would like to give you a better answer than that, but based on what I've studied about the UN and its role in Palestine, I can't give you a different answer. Point 17, in the event Hamas delays or rejects this proposal, the above, including the scaled-up aid operation, will proceed in the terror-free areas handed over from the IDF to the ISF. As we've seen with what the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, I don't remember what it is, but where we've got Palestinians in these sort of cattle pens, and then we murder them as they're trying to get food, as children have burning soup poured on them. This is point 17. 18, an interfaith dialogue process will be established based on the values of tolerance and peaceful coexistence. Who is going to sit on this board? Are Israelis going to teach us about tolerance and peaceful coexistence? To try and change mindsets and narratives of Palestinians and Israelis by emphasizing the benefits that can be derived from peace? Let's be clear. Palestinians and Israelis know the benefits that can be derived from peace. The Israelis are not interested in peace. They're interested in conquest. They're interested in taking more and more land. They're interested in the Greater Israel Project. Ilan Pappé talks about in the largest prison on earth, talking about 1967, that people who are not particularly religious Jews in 67, when the Sinai was captured, the Golan was captured, the West Bank, they got caught up in this messianic vision of Israel. He said even non-religious people in 67 got caught up in this vision of Greater Israel. And now you have very militant settlers, millions of them living in the West Bank, who will not leave if tomorrow, going back to our fictional two-state solution, if tomorrow the West Bank were cut out and said, this is Palestine now, those people are not going to leave. They will stay there and they will die on those hilltops armed with weapons, which will probably be airdropped. They'll airdrop weapons to them. They'll airdrop nuclear weapons in for the settlers. And the settlers will use this and they will resist within the Palestinian state. So unless they are removed, there's no hope for a Palestinian state anyway. Or unless the people who stay, and this is impossible for illegal, immoral settlers, do you think that they're going to stay in peace in a Palestinian state? They went in trying to steal land from the Palestinians in the first place. These are not the people of which model citizens are made. But I mean, this is the most humorous part. The values of tolerance and peaceful coexistence. Do we really think that the Israelis are going to teach us about this? Point 19, while Gaza redevelopment advances and when the PA reform program is faithfully carried out, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. And point 20, the United States will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. I take us back to the beginning, in which Benjamin Netanyahu says that there will be no two-state solution. And when I'll point out point 20, Ilan Pape and numerous other people, the United States they have no moral authority to be the arbiter. The United States sits on the side of Israel. So how can the United States be an arbiter between these two people? You would have to bring in somebody who's either a neutral or who has a legacy of not siding with one party. I would love to say that there are neutrals, but those very famous neutral states have chosen to become not neutral in recent years. We're thinking of countries like Switzerland or Finland or Sweden. They've decided that neutrality doesn't matter anymore. We're going to go all in on the narratives of today. So the United States is not an honest broker. The United States only does whatever Israel tells them to do, really, or whatever they want to do for the Israelis. But the United States cannot be considered an honest broker in this, and it must be removed. I don't know who would go in its place. Would it be Russia? Would it be China? Would it be Iran? Would it be Qatar? Would it be, I don't know, Brazil, Colombia? There could be any number of people, but it cannot be the United States. If we want a just and lasting peace, and I'm using that phrase, I don't know why that popped into my head. It's something that is being bandied about by the regular usual EU suspects about Ukraine. But if we just use that phrase, just and lasting peace, on its own, freed from the um, connotations related to Ukraine, the idea that the United States would be involved is laughable at best. So for those who have joined the stream during this last period, I've just gone on a very long discussion of the so-called Gaza peace plan from Trump. And it's a joke. And anyone who would read this and believe it could only do so if they don't know anything about Palestine. If they woke up yesterday and they heard about the Palestine-Israel conflict and they read this would sound something like legitimate to them. But every single sentence, every single phrase, as we read through all 20 points, and I realize we've taken almost an hour to do so now, we can see is effectively written by Israel or using the Zionist frame of reference, or is dishonest, or we know is not credible. So the whole thing is not credible, and I can only hope that the Palestinians reject it in every way. But as always, I give agency and I wish agency for the Palestinians. If they choose to do this, I will do my best to support them however they can, however they want to proceed forward. But I would hope that they would not do this. The last thing I want to talk about today, and I'll wrap up with this if there are no further questions. And thank you for coming to join us. We're marching towards 3,000 subscribers. And as I started today's live stream with a moment of silence for all the civilians that have been murdered, and even also the combatants who have died in this conflict in the last 2 years, I want to make sure that we talk about the flotilla. So I released a new video about Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom. I did a review on that I would say some years ago in 2024. It's 2025 now, almost 2026. And in that review, I talked about the various operations that have happened in Gaza, Protective Edge, Cast Lead, and everything that Norm Finkelstein had documented. I did not talk about the Mavi Marmara because I didn't see a way for it to fit in with the other land-based IDF incursions into Gaza. I wanted to stay very focused on that. So when I did this new review, I saw it as a great opportunity to talk about the Mavi Marmara. If you don't know about the Mavi Marmara, I've done a video on it if you want to look in Palestine Bookshelf after the stream. But it's a 2010 flotilla incident. The Mavi Marmara was a Turkish flagged ship, I think mostly paid for and supplied by this Turkish organization, Solidarity with Palestine. Everything had been vetted as usual. The terrorist supplies of baby formula, flour, diapers, all those things that you can use obviously to make weapons and kill people. And this boat was intercepted in international waters in the middle of the night by Israeli commandos. 9 civilians were killed, but there was resistance, and some of the Israeli commandos were captured. And hilariously, there were photos of them being nursed by members of the flotilla. Think that someone had a leg broken or whatever else, but they had was blunt instruments. They had no firearms. They didn't have any weapons training. So 9 of them were murdered in the middle of the night by Israeli commandos. But Norm Finkelstein and others, Noam Chomsky, Ilan Pappé, talk about the fact that Israel was so humiliated by this that that's part of how they launch military incursions, is to restore faith with the Israeli people. Okay, well, they may have humiliated us out on the ocean, but we'll show those Palestinians and we're going to go kill a bunch of people today. So when we're looking at the recent flotilla, I think, and this is where I don't want to discourage my friends or people who've been supporting here on the channel, saying, Stephen, aren't you excited about the Sumud flotilla? Like, things are going to happen. I'm never going to discourage people acting on behalf of Palestine, never. But the problem is I've read too much, and I'm still a beginner in many ways, but I've read too much history, not just in the last 20 years, but in the last 100 years. And I can tell you, we've had flotillas before. We've had flotillas ignored by the world before. We've had people killed on a flotilla. In this particular case, I don't think anyone's been killed. I do think they've been tortured. I mean, Greta Thunberg's been famously tortured, returned back. I think an Austrian gave some testimony yesterday or today in which some of the flotilla participants were injured. They cried for help to the Israeli captors. The Israeli captors said, "We don't have any veterinarians available," implying, of course, that you are animals. So we don't have any animal doctors to treat you. And the thing is, they think they're funny. This is the Israelis think they're funny, but they're just showing over and over who they are because they don't care what anyone thinks. This is the problem, I think. People think the Israelis care about their image. They don't care. As long as they have the US on their side, they can do what they want. As long as they have the US on their side, Ben Gvir can say, we're the chosen people and we don't have to obey international law. So this Sumud flotilla, people thought, oh, how are you going to stop these boats? And they got stopped just like they got stopped last time, just like they'll get stopped every time. Israel's not going to suddenly decide, oh, well, I guess we have to let these boats come, deliver baby formula, deliver diapers, deliver flour, and humiliate us on the world stage. That's not ever going to happen. I appreciate the show of solidarity. I appreciate the willingness, the bravery of people to be captured and tortured for the Palestinians. I cannot imagine what that's like. And while I may disagree with Greta on many other things, wow. I mean, the bravery of that girl to go and know she's going to get captured, know she's going to be targeted by the Israelis, and to do it. I mean, kudos. I people who know me know that, I have no time for Greta on many other things, but on this, kudos, young lady. I mean, unbelievable. So while I appreciate and love and respect the actions of people, it doesn't change the fact that I know that Israel isn't going to allow something like that to happen. They will do whatever they want to do. And as usual, they act in the middle of the night when no one can see them, but they really don't care what people think. And that's the thing, is even if you try to shame Israel, what really works is boycott, divestment, and sanction. And I hope to do more of this in 2026, in which we name and shame companies that continue to support Israel even now. And what can we do to stop that? What can we do to play our part? We can play this role economically. Countries cannot exist just on ideology. They have to pay their bills. They have to keep the electricity on. They have to trade. They have to have money. And Israel can be choked financially. And that is something we can all do. We don't have to ask our government for permission to choke Israel financially. We can do that. And that's really what I think is a solution we can participate in, because our governments are just going to stand by and allow all of this to happen. Potentially our last question. Thank you for those of you who've come on, stayed on, been a participant in any way in today's live stream. I appreciate you. Thank you for your support of the channel. And I hope that you take a look at the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which is the main charity that we support. Any proceeds that we have, we send their way. They're a medical charity that helps Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. They often return them back to Palestine after they've gotten that care. Leela has another question. I'm really glad you have taken the time to unpack this extremely topical document. We'll listen again with more focus, but thanks, and I'll be sharing it. And unfortunately, regarding the flotilla, New Zealand has really shown their hand. They support Israel. Remember that you don't have to support Israel by your words. You can support Israel by doing nothing. And that's what so much of the world has done. And that's why I said at the beginning, while we're not going to say it's a terrible thing that the UK has recognized Palestine, it's stupid to say something like that, but we can say, so what? So you recognize Palestine, but you sell weapons to the Israelis to bomb Palestine. It just shows that this is a performance for you. Any world leader who's going up there and doing this performative action of, oh, we recognize the state of Palestine, and they still continue to sell weapons to Israel to bomb Palestinians, they show themselves to be unserious about this issue. Thank you for taking the time to come. I apologize. I'm just hoping in the future Substack moves to a different format for streaming. It makes you do it on your phone, so I'm stuck in this sort of format here. Thank you for your patience. And when the live stream ends, it should be streaming by Substack. So if you want to keep the conversation going by commenting or asking questions, I'll do my best to answer those as quickly as I can. But thanks for stopping by, and let's continue to learn about Palestine and support Palestinian cause in whatever way that we can with the gifts and talent and the means that we have.